Okay, everybody, let's do a little more Python. With this video, we are going to do some input testing or just testing of the content of a particular variable. Now, I'll start off by saying that most of the time when you're dealing with user input or with file reading, right, you're bringing stuff in from a file, what you're dealing with is strings. And so that's mostly what we're going to talk about. And to start off with, all of the methods that I'm going to show you are part of the documentation, but one thing that's helpful every once in a while is that if you remember that there's a built-in help. So if I do something like this, help string, right? And then I just run that. Now you can see down here that in idle, it squeezed a whole bunch of text. So I'm going to show you that. And look at this. We've got the class string object, and a lot of the methods that we're going to work with today are all right in here. And so it's sort of built in, right? If you ever panic and you can't find the stuff that you want, remember that there's all kinds of immediate help at your fingertips. Okay, so we will comment that out. Okay, so this is just a collection of variables, right? Here we've got A1, 1 in quotes, and like that. So let's just do a couple of tests. We'll start it off. Let's say that you've brought in user input and you want to decide if the user has given you what you want. Now there's lots of ways to do this. I'm just going to go over a couple today. And remember, the same thing works for stuff that's coming in from a file. Now as a reminder, one of the really handy things that we can use is the type. So I can ask Python what the type is of the variable that we're bringing in. So I might say something like this, type variable 1. Now this doesn't actually do anything, right, in terms of output. You can see that nothing happened over here. But I can, if I combine that with a print statement, something like this. Now it says, oh, well, you've got a string right there. Okay, so now all of a sudden, when we're dealing with this, we can say, well, if the thing that you gave me is the right type, then I'll go on with my processing. You might do this with a try or except or something like that. But maybe what we'll do is we'll add a couple of tests here. So I can do the same thing, right? If var1 or var2 is equal to this, that's a very common way to do our test, then I'll just print, we'll add something here, is var2, like that. And we'll see what that does. I put it in quotes by accident. There we go. Okay. Well, let's keep going. More tests, more things to try out. Now, a very common thing to wonder is whether or not the variable that you've been given falls in a particular range or if it falls in a particular classification. And so up here we've got var3, and what we're going to do is we're going to test to see if it is a numeric character. Now, there's a couple of things we want to point out here. One is that isnumeric is not necessarily looking for an integer or a float. It's looking to determine if this character was a numeric character. The other thing that we want to point out here is that this is a test. And so all of these methods, well, not all of them, but a lot of the methods actually return a Boolean. So that's why we got true right over here. Maybe we'll bring this up the screen a little bit here. Now let's mix it up a little bit. I'm going to add a print statement here that says, give me the type of var3. And then I'm going to ask the type of the test. So let's see what happens. Oh, look at that. So we asked what the type was of var3. That's way up here. That's a string, even though it passed the isNumeric test. And then I said, what's the type of the test? And it is a Boolean, which goes back to this guy right here. Okay, so a couple of more. Now, the reason I'm including these in this video is because I forget these all the time, but they're really, really handy when we want to use them. All right, so here are two other variables that we have, and we're saying, well, what is var5 alphanumeric? Are all the characters inside var5 alphanumeric? And the next one says, well, we're looking at var 6. Are all the characters in that part of the alphabet? Let's see what happens there. Oh, we got a true and a false. So what we're saying here is that var 5, all of those characters are alphanumeric. In var 6, were they all part of the alphabet? Well, we've got 1, 2, 3 in there, so not. But what if we did this? And we change that to var 6. Are they all alphanumeric? Oh, and there we go. So all of these in var 5 were alphanumeric. All of these in var 6 were alphanumeric. But we tested also if var 6 values were in the alphabet. Again, very handy tools and tests to remember that are out there. Now, you might be asking yourself where in the world all of these came from and what are the actual tests that are being done? How do we know if the values are alphanumeric, right? I mean, we can ask it and we can get a result back from Python. But one of the handy things to remember is what Python considers uppercase, lowercase, printable characters, all of that stuff. So what we might do now is we might say, I'm going to import the package string. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to say, well, maybe we'll do it down the bottom here. I'm going to say help string. Now we're going to ignore a lot of this because it'll be a repeat, but there's a couple of interesting things that happen in the data section here. If we go all the way down here, so string and str are a little bit different. Take a look right here. We can see all of the values that are considered to be part of different categories within Python. And all of these are actually variables themselves. So if I get rid of this and I say print string dot, oh, we'll do ASCII lowercase. Oh, there they are right there. We'll do ASCII lowercase, just like that. What happens if we do that? Oh, there they are right there. So we can see that we can now access all of these, and we also understand a little bit about the testing that Python is doing when we ask it these questions. All right, let's do a couple more and then we'll call it a day. Now here's a couple of other things that we can do that are very similar to the test, but we've been doing this all with variables, but there's nothing at all that says that I can't do something like this value here. And actually, let's do two of these. So I'm just going to do the isnumeric test here, but this time I'm putting in an actual value rather than a variable. And then I've got another one down here that says, is this a digit? So here's our digits, right? So is var3 up here a digit? Is it in there? And then is var3, is that a decimal? And maybe we'll change that to var4. All right, here we go. Okay, so what in the world just happened? So we tested 4, right? So this just shows us that we can actually put a value in there rather than a variable. Although it's much easier to use a variable, right? We don't want to hard code stuff like this. But in both of these cases, we got a test. One is true and one is false, right? So that makes sense. A is not numeric. var3, is that a digit? Did it fall inside the digit? var3 was up here. 1, it is in the digits. Oh no, what just happened here? Instead of giving me nice clean output, this actually crashed. Now, what happened here? Well, var4 is actually a float. And we would know that if we did something like this. We said type. Okay, now this will crash again, but that's okay. We're going to fix it. Okay, so is a float. Now, there's a couple ways that we could fix this. We could say var4, right? And then we could do that. Okay, got a little ahead of myself there, but who cares? Who cares? Happy accidents. All right, so we got the type of var4. We knew that was a float. And these are all string methods, and I was futzing around with, I threw a, what did I do? I threw I changed it to an integer real quick. So obviously these are string methods that we're working with. And so if we change var4 to a string, and then we can get back whether or not it's in the decimal range there. Okay, so that might be how we could fix it, or we could just realize that we've got a float that we're dealing with and it's not part of the strings. Okay, goodness, a couple more tests here we might do. So we might say, is the variable that we're after, or the value that we're after, inside a string? And we'll add another one here. We'll add 2. And we're just going to comment out these like that. So now we've got these 2 tests. Remember that we have a list here with our characters, and then we also have the this variable up here. And so this first one is going to say, is that letter inside this collection, right? And then we've got if var1 in my list. So it's just 2 ways to test if the variable value is found in there. And these are just 2 ways to test, whether or not the thing that you're looking for is in something else. A couple of more happy string tests, right? Is lower. This is related to this ASCII character lowercase here, but we can say, well, I'm going to iterate through a list in this case and say whether or not all of the values are lowercase. There they are. They all were. So let's capitalize those things. Goodness, more tests. I had no idea how many tests I was going to put in this particular video. We'll speed things up a little bit. I know we're getting a little long here. So we'll put these guys here. We'll comment out these. There we go. All right, so what's this one going to do? var2, and we'll bring it down here where we're working. var2 is equal to 1. And so just like we did this test on the list, or if it was in this set here, then we might say, well, is a var2 in this particular range? And then we'll talk about these here in a second. We'll see what we get. Okay, so var2 is equal to 1. var2 was found in this range, so we printed out that we found it. So you can also look in a range. You can look in a list, you can look at it in a collection, you can look in a range of values. And that's a great test for if the user is giving you input and you want a number in between a couple of values. Of course, make sure that you're changing to integers when you're doing that, because there'll be strings when they come in. Now, another handy value or another handy test to do is something an instance. You can say, put these both on the screen here for you, and we'll bring, we're using var1 and var4, so we'll bring those down. Okay, now this first one is instance. And this is just simply a variation on the type question. And so if we did a type, we'll do that, print type var1, right, we would get that var1 is a string. And here we're testing to see if var1 is in fact a string. And then we'll do the same test here whether or not var1 is an integer. So I'm just going to comment this out for a second, and we'll run this. Okay, so in the first case, the is instance, right, we found out that it was the class was a string. And now we're saying, well, what is this an instance of a string? And that comes back true. Is instance, right? In this case, we're asking if var1 is an integer. Now, I could have found out the type again and just used the string, but this is a really handy test to do on a single line. And it is, of course, false. All right, so what are these lines doing down here? Well, they're just making use of the type. If var4 here is equal to an integer, right? If the type is equal to an integer, right? Now it doesn't matter what the actual value of our var4 is, just what its type is. If it's a float, or we'll print unknown type. So this is just here as sort of a catch-all. Let's see what happens. Okay. And so what we got out of all this mess is that it was in fact a float. And just maybe to make it obvious where we are, Well, goodness, that was a lot of tests. Hopefully this set of tests, this manipulation of strings and finding out what we can do about them will help you. I know that I forget all the time about the things that are available inside Python to help me determine what is going on with the input. And remember that these work whether you're asking for user input or reading from a file, or just if you're testing values somewhere in your program. Well, that about do it for string testing and string methods. And no matter what you're doing with your strings or ints or floats, remember it's Python. You can do this.